As Donald Trump's controversial tariffs take effect, Americans are about to face a financial storm that many didn't see coming. Despite Trump's promises to bring economic relief and lower costs for everyday consumers, new reports are now revealing that his proposed tariffs, ranging from 10% to 20% on every single imported good, are set to drastically raise prices for everyday items. Retailers across the United States, companies like Target, Walmart, Lowe's, TJ Maxx, and many others, are already preparing for these price hikes. They've devised plans to pass these extra costs directly to consumers, and that means prices for everything from groceries to electronics to home goods are about to increase in ways we haven't seen before. This won't just affect high-end luxury items. Even essential products that millions of Americans rely on will soon be more expensive. For millions of working-class Americans who voted for Trump, the promise of lower prices and economic revitalization is about to be exposed as little more than political rhetoric. What they may not have anticipated was that these tariffs, instead of helping them, would ultimately hurt their wallets and deepen the financial struggles many have been facing. In this video, we'll break down the reality of these proposed tariffs, why retailers are set to pass the cost on to consumers, and how this could affect everyday Americans. Additionally, we'll explore how this economic shift plays into broader issues of corporate greed, political failure, and economic inequality, while examining why many voters are about to be shocked by the very policies they believed would help them. 1. The mechanics of tariffs. Who really pays the price? When Donald Trump announced his tariff proposals, many Americans were led to believe that these new tariffs would punish foreign countries, particularly China, for unfair trade practices and bring jobs back to the U.S. But the truth is more complicated. Tariffs are essentially taxes on imported goods paid by the companies importing these products into the United States. This means that the companies responsible for bringing products into the U.S. are the ones who bear the initial cost of the tariffs. However, those companies do not simply absorb these costs, they pass them along to the consumer. For instance, if a retailer like Target imports a popular item from China and faces a 10% tariff, the cost to them goes up. But instead of absorbing that cost and eating into their profits, they raise the price of the product for you, the consumer. It's not the foreign exporter who pays for these tariffs, it's the American shopper who ends up with a higher bill. Many people are under the misconception that tariffs will lower the cost of American-made goods or that foreign governments will be paying these taxes. This simply isn't true. For example, a simple appliance like a washing machine could see a price increase from $500 to $550 due to a 10% tariff, but the retailer is likely to add an additional markup on top of that to preserve their profit margins. 2. Corporate greed unleashed. Retailers' plans to maximize profits. What makes this scenario even more concerning is that the major retailers, the ones that control most of the goods Americans purchase every day, are not only prepared to pass on these costs, but are actively strategizing to maximize their profits. These companies are publicly announcing their plans to raise prices to cover the added expense of tariffs, even though they could choose to absorb some of the costs themselves. Target, Walmart, Lowe's, AutoZone, and TJ Maxx have all had meetings with their executive teams and boards of directors to discuss price hikes. Retailers such as Columbia Sportswear, Black & Decker, and Steve Madden have already indicated that they will raise prices across the board to ensure their profit margins remain intact. For companies like Walmart, which serve millions of low-income Americans daily, price hikes are not just a minor inconvenience, they're a matter of survival. Millions of families rely on these big-box stores to provide affordable goods. But when Walmart raises prices, it's not just a slight inconvenience. It has a massive ripple effect that can further strain household budgets. The real tragedy here is that these companies, with their multi-billion-dollar profits, are making a conscious choice to push the burden of these tariffs onto the consumers, even though they could very easily absorb the additional costs themselves. This is corporate greed at its finest, using Trump's tariffs as an excuse to jack up prices while maintaining record profits. 3. The real impact on everyday Americans. A perfect storm of inflation. For millions of Americans, The consequences of these tariffs will be felt immediately, and the impacts will be severe. We're not talking about just a few cents more for everyday items. The price increases could be as high as 25% or more for some products. For example, if you're in the market for a new car or car parts, you could see costs increase dramatically. Cars and car parts are often imported from other countries, and with tariffs hitting these items, the prices are only going to rise. In fact, car prices could go up anywhere from 15% to 25%, depending on the model and the parts needed for repairs. It doesn't end with automobiles. If you're planning on renovating your home, expect the cost of building materials like lumber, drywall, and paint to climb as well. Whether you're buying a new refrigerator, a washer-dryer set, or simply replacing a broken appliance, the price tags on these items are about to get much higher. And that's not even counting the non-durable goods, the everyday products like clothes, groceries, and personal items that will all see price hikes. For Americans already dealing with inflation, these additional costs are the last thing they need. Every price increase will be felt by working families, seniors on fixed incomes, and those just getting by. 4. Broken promises, Trump's economic policies, and the betrayal of his base. During his campaign, Donald Trump promised to bring economic relief to American families. He argued that by implementing tariffs on imports, he would create jobs and reduce the cost of everyday items for Americans. Trump's base, the working-class voters who were drawn to his America First message, bought into these promises, hoping that his policies would ease their financial burdens. However, Trump's tariffs are proving to be a massive economic misstep, one that will hurt the very people who supported him the most. Instead of bringing about cheaper goods and greater economic stability, his tariffs are only exacerbating financial problems for millions of Americans. The people who voted for Trump hoping to see lower prices and better job opportunities are now finding themselves caught in the crossfire of corporate greed and flawed policy. Walmart and other major retailers are the ones who will benefit from these tariffs, not the working-class people who voted for Trump. As these companies raise prices across the board, the gap between the rich and poor will only grow wider, and Trump's promise of economic revival will ring hollow. 5. A missed opportunity. How Democrats failed to communicate the real issue. One of the biggest failures in the response to Trump's tariffs is the lack of clear and effective communication from the Democratic Party. While the Democrats were quick to criticize Trump's trade policies, they failed to adequately explain to the American public the true costs of these tariffs, namely, that everyday consumers would be the ones to pay for them. The rise in prices caused by tariffs is not a natural byproduct of international trade. It is the result of corporate greed and the economic policies pushed by Trump and his administration. Democrats had a real opportunity to educate the public about how these tariffs were merely attacks on American consumers and not the punitive measure against foreign countries that Trump portrayed. Economists and political commentators on the left warned about the negative effects of these tariffs, but they were largely drowned out by Trump's rhetoric and the misinformation spread by corporate-backed media. This failure to explain the real impact of these tariffs will come back to haunt the Democratic Party as working-class voters, many of whom were already skeptical of the party's economic policies. Watch as the costs of everyday life skyrocket. The reality of Donald Trump's tariff policies is setting in, and the financial consequences will be widespread. As major retailers prepare to raise their prices, working-class Americans are about to pay the price for Trump's flawed economic vision. These price hikes are not a mere inconvenience. They are a direct tax on the American people, particularly those who can least afford it. Trump's promises to lower costs and revitalize the economy have proven to be empty rhetoric. His tariffs will harm millions of Americans, especially the very people who supported him in the hopes of economic relief. As these massive corporations raise prices across the board, the working-class voters who once believed in Trump's promises will be left to foot the bill. This serves as a stark reminder of the true nature of corporate America and the policies that allow them to flourish at the expense of the American public. The coming months will reveal just how much pain these tariffs will cause, and voters will soon have to reckon with the consequences of their choices. For Democrats, the need to clearly communicate the impact of these policies has never been more urgent. In the end, the only ones who will benefit from these tariffs are the corporations that will profit from higher prices. As for everyday Americans, they are left to pick up the pieces of a broken economic promise.